morning, everyone. Welcome to an amazing new month with our Leading This Generation discussing our People of Color talk. This month, we are once again excited to share opinion with our generation. We are once again excited to share in that there is the society, and there is every one of our choices, our reactions, and our decisions in season. This month, we want to focus on 5 points under discussion. The discussion that is who's holding office in our generation. The discussion that remains around the office, the business that has become our generation. And when we say the business, we say that for some people, every society's reaction has become a business. And today our society does not question our leadership, but we question the choices of leaders. We question in that we want to know, and that every one of us in season want to know who's holding office in a generation that feels so abused, that feels so one-sided, and that feels so manipulated by the choices that are happening, by the decisions that are happening in our communities. One of our points today is the Parliamentary House, right? The Parliamentary House is that communities depend on. The Parliamentary House is that our society awaits that there is someone that would provide for them. Our Parliamentary House has become that everything that is happening in our communities today, our society requires an answer, and our communities requires an answer from the Parliamentary House. Our community, that is the society, we want to discuss that. That is the community of people that has been educated to be divided. Amongst that, there is the one society that is that we cannot question other than to associate with the other. We want to discuss the prisoners in our communities. We want to discuss the crime rate that are being created in our communities, and that are being created from the Parliamentary House. And we want to discuss the business that is the office itself. And when we discuss those points today, we want us to listen to what is our opinion, where we are at. And when our viewers listen to our discussion, they have the right to give their opinion where they are at with our generation in general. And when we give your opinion, you give your opinion in that there is gonna be protective for you, in that there is gonna be non-abusive to the other in your community. And our opinions today becomes that we say that some of us has never voted. And some of us have decided to not vote in our countries. And when we decided to not vote, we have decided to not choose, because our leadership should be one house. And when we discuss the parliamentary leaders today, we want to again focus and emphasize on the one house management. The requirement to manage a country with that there is one house. And we want us to really prepare for that discussion today, the one house in our parliamentary leadership. Leading our generation is not that difficult. The question is not, can our leaders lead in season? The question with leading our generation is, has the parliamentary leaders gotten to that is the one house within our generation? We look at the parliamentary house in South Africa today, and we look at the television stations and at the television rooms and the television programs today, and we learned that our parliamentary house received a way of managing the parliamentary house from the United States of America's way of how the parliamentary house should be managed and led. We remember years ago, we used to watch the Ricky Lake show. And when we used to watch the Ricky Lake show, we used to watch a group of people that sometimes look similar to us in our countries. And when we looked at the situation that relates to the celebrity house, we look at a situation that governmental leaders today, when they present the parliamentary house to you, they present that to you, that is exactly according to them, the individual that looks similar to someone in our communities. Speaking of the South African government specifically today, they lead with that is the Ricky Lake team in-house and the drunkenness in-house and the team of leaders that is visible when we switch the television screen and when we look at our parliamentary team of leaders, it is the team that exactly looks similar to someone else in our country or in our community. The Parliamentary House has chosen our community, PAL community, and in PAL community we had someone in our country that was to some community members a disturbance. And when you look at Cyril Ramaphosa's team today and you look at his representation that he has presented himself and who the Ricky Lake team is that's sitting with him in office today, we looked at exactly that our parliamentary leaders want to explain something while they are trying to create something. It is that the television screens for us today is, when you switch the television screen on, it is either you accept where you are at or you get out of the room. And today that's the voice that when we look at the leaders, we do not blame Cyril Ramaphosa in person today. We blame the house that has manipulated our generation. We blame the house that has caused our generation to be disruptive and to be abusive. We blame the House of Parliament, that is everyone in the parliamentary house's decision and choice when they have to answer and when they have to make choices and when they have to provide and when they have to structure our generation. We do not question the education of the house today that can be manipulated, but we require the one society education to be from our parliamentary house. And when our parliamentary house today gives us one society education, our parliamentary house gives us that we find protection at when we look at every part of the governmental functions that has become everything about our society. We require our parliamentary leaders to not look at someone from the parliamentary house that looks similar to someone in the community and send the message that says, go and destroy this person in the community. Because nowadays, parliamentary house and leaders does not speak today with a message, with a word, but it has become a hashtag room. And a hashtag room is exactly that. That a message is there. Everyone tunes in on Instagram or on social media. And on Instagram, the hashtag is said, and some people exactly know the instruction according to the hashtag. And in that, our generation had to learn to be independent from that is gonna be abusive to our society and our community in general. I always say that in every protective service, there's different teams. You get your instructive teams of people, you get your responsive teams of people, and you get your protective teams of people. You get people who's employed today in our defense force and in our police force in our armies, there are sometimes instructive teams of people. There are minutes in an instructive way. And today, the choices of the Parliamentary House has caused our Defence Force teams to also maybe sometimes be in aggression to the community. In aggression, not to the choices of our community, because our people accept the choice that we are sometimes going to make, but to that for everything that happens in the community, the defense force, the army, would have to go into war for. It is that our leaders had an opportunity to protect our countries. And when our countries today are aggressed and abused, young boys that find themselves in employment for government, that find themselves in employment in the defense force, in the protective services, in our armies, our navies, would have to then be deployed sometimes to go into war because of our countries that are disrupted. And when these guys go into war, they don't go into war in our countries itself, but they have to be deployed to different countries because of the disruptiveness of our countries that sometimes relates to arguments in different international countries. And when we educate our society today, our televisions, our television rooms, our producers, our radio teams would have to be in that. There is the education of our generation that does not require our young people to go into war because of disruptive communities in countries. And when our television teams find themselves having to be in the education room of the Parliamentary House, our television and radio stations have the same attitude that sometimes disrupt, because the Parliamentary House sometimes fails to disrupt our communities and our countries. And while our society, there are the community leaders that requires to be educated, are sometimes deprived of the education that they have been educated, then when Rabia wears a yellow jacket, someone else wears a yellow jacket, and it's fine. That when Rabia starts a business, someone else starts a business, and it's sometimes fine. And when the business owners get in competition with one another, the whole society are sometimes affected by the competition. And competition today in our society is not we wearing the same clothes anymore. That was the education years ago. That came from the Education House, from the United House of America, from the White House specifically. We do not talk about the Celebrity House in general. We talk about the White House that has become the voice for countries and nations where parliamentary leaders manage from. And when the House of Nations educated that this is the color, and it has been revealed in our 2023 State of the Nation address in America, that the Parliamentary House and their colors. And while the education came through, the manipulation in the house was there. And while our television teams, our radio station teams, our Parliamentary House leaders and Parliamentary House members were in that they decided to be aggressive to our community members because of crime, because of alcohol abuse in the community, because of reasons that could have been managed and controlled by the Parliamentary House in a way that was non-abused to our communities in general. And when our Parliamentary House decided to educate our television teams to be aggressive to our community members, when our Parliamentary House has educated our television teams to be aggressive in our society in general, when our Parliamentary House educated the television teams to educate the way that they want to educate. Our armies, our defense force, our navies have found themselves in that were the target guys in the community. And when the guys employed to go into the army, they did not realize that the situation in our country might actually at times be manipulated, and it might actually at times require them exactly to stay where they are at in our countries. So when our parliamentary leaders were required to make a decision, they decided against some of the community members. And these community members today are our protective teams and our defense force teams, our Navy guys that are all of that exactly, but that finds themselves today the one having to decide whether their team's gonna go also and join the armies internationally, or whether the parliamentary house are gonna get themselves in that is managing the country in a way that's non-abusive. And for the teams that does not and that are not deployed into international countries to go and defend, the requirement for those teams in-house are exactly to manage the house and to educate the parliamentary house, to educate that is the television teams, to not abuse the defense force, to not abuse the protective services of the countries, and to not abuse our armies. And when our parliamentary leaders find themselves having to independently decide, the parliamentary house sometimes have had that they were in argument with the defense force, with the protective services, and with the armies who are deployed internationally. And while the parliamentary house had to look internationally for protection for themselves also, we have heard of something called a new world order, a new process of how this, you wear yellow, that one wears yellow, you look like that one wipes the one out that looks similar to that one. When that process, that parliamentary houses implemented many years ago, became a new world order for our generation, and became a way where someone else's life was challenged by the choices of our society also, and that includes our managing house, that is our parliamentary houses. When people's lives became endangered, everyone ran for that there is going to be protection for themselves. The churches ran for that there is their protective teams. The business owners ran for that internationally, there is going to be their protective teams. The parliamentary house ran for that they have allowed themselves to own that there is their protective teams internationally. And when our generation look at the society in general, in South Africa is an exact example of that everyone ran for protective and for defense. In our country's crime rate that are recreated, prisoners go into prison, young boys go into war, and the same process in a different way. The same abuses to some parents in a different way. The same, some people are being deprived on a daily basis from those choices that governments call a new world order. How they order someone's life, how they send an instruction, how they give a hashtag, and how someone else are paid to go and react exactly on that. And when we look at who holds the office of those choices in our country specifically, we are going to have to look as a nation and as generations of international people. And we are going to have to make a firm decision on our parliamentary houses in general. And that process that someone else have found protection in, and someone else have been deprived to be where they are required to be on this earth and on this in this amazing universe. And when our society finds themselves having to independently allow themselves to manage business in our communities without having to be dependent on that is going to abuse our communities. Our societies are required to be firm on how they are going to be decided on how the countries are going to be managed in a way that is non-abusive to everyone in our countries. And for those people who are still going to follow instruction from parliamentary leaders that are abusive to House and to our countries, and there are not one House or one Parliament House, those leaders would have to find themselves today having to deal with that. That is their teams of people, their processes, and the society in general is going to have to manage the country in general. And the society today is every business this season, every individual that is having to make a choice, every individual that is gonna having to sit around the table and have to decide on how this process are gonna be managed, so that no house and no young person are gonna be deprived of that is also meant for them in our generation. No young people are gonna be deprived of that is also where they were birthed at to be in our generation. It is that we are no longer gonna question who holds office, but we are going to step in, and our generation's requirement is to react to that is protected for everyone in our communities, in our countries, and in our generation. And when we are going to manage our generation in that way, our parliamentary house's voice is going to be that. But the choices and when we find ourselves in office is going to be exactly that is non-depriving to the community member, to the employee, and to the person who finds themselves in your business or an employee in where you are at in our society. When it comes to our television teams and our radio teams, they are going to exactly educate that is going to be non-abusive to our communities and to our society, to our countries, and non-abusive to international countries in general. We require everyone where they are employed at to manage the process and own it from where you are employed at and where you find yourself at, and being part of the society. And that choice that is going to be the parliamentary house, and why they employed Cyril Ramaphosa to abuse him and to make him the face of these discussions is one thing, and we are not going to be restricted by what other parliamentary leaders has decided upon. But we are going to manage the house in that way, that the team who employed Cyril Ramaphosa for him to be the face of these discussions and for him to be abused in all of these discussions is the team that we are going to have to manage, and the team that our society are going to have to educate. And if we have our focus in our parliamentary house, we are gonna have our focus on that is the parliamentary house is part of our countries, but our educations is gonna be exactly where we find ourselves at in our society. It is that we are not gonna look for someone for years from today and disrupt our countries for years from today to look for who holds the office. But we are going to reprimand and manage and own where we are employed at in our countries and in our international generation. And when we educate from where we are employed at, we are not going to be deprived out of the parliamentary house's decisions and discussions. We are going to educate the parliamentary house on a one house education. This is the parliamentary team that are leading team this year, but this is the one house education, that the house remains one house. That the house are not going to be divided between this parliamentary team and that parliamentary team. And that those education that is the divided house stays out of the parliamentary rooms discussions. When we enter the parliamentary house and when our society and our team of employees in our communities and our parliamentary leaders enter the parliamentary house, the division of that stays outside the house. And the house discussion remains one, the house education remains one, the house communication and international matters remains one. And the one house approach is everyone who enters the parliamentary room, the parliamentary house, is everyone who has a voice that is 100% voice in the parliamentary house. And any other divisions and parliamentary teams remain outside of the discussion. And when we remain outside, there is now the divided teams of colors of I wear yellow and you wear red today, or I wear yellow and you wear green today. those discussions that are outside of the door, that is the different colors, is exactly that is the managing teams in the communities. But in house, the one house is the one education. And when it's the managing team in the communities, it is exactly managing the communities in a way that the different parliamentary leaders have voice in the parliamentary house. But in the parliamentary house, all parliamentary leaders' voice and all parliamentary members have 100% voice. I know it sounds very, 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 very technical how I explain the out-house discussions and the in-house requirement for everyone to be involved in every decision making, in every discussion that relates to our countries. And that anything outside the parliamentary house's door before you enter the parliamentary house and any divisions is outside exactly means when you're in the parliamentary house and you are managing and you are leading, then you exactly lead with that. There is going to be non-abusive to the parliamentary house in general. That when you are in the parliamentary house and you find yourself in the parliamentary house employed, you exactly are in the discussion room in that is not going to question the parliamentary house, but there is going to be that there is the one house society, there is the one house education, there is the one house of dealing with decisions in the parliamentary house. And there is not that you look at the parliamentary leader or the person that you speak to in the parliament as someone from a different parliamentary group or as someone from a different team of people. You would have our leaders in house would have to learn to look at the house as one house when they're in the house and to not abuse the discussions in the house. Our leaders in the parliamentary house would have to learn that all the different colors of the parliamentary leaders and parliamentary teams are that stays outside the door, and every discussion in the parliamentary house is for that is for one community, for one society, for one nation, and for international nations in general. And on those discussions, the parliamentary leaders would have to, in every decision that they make, they would have to reason in that's protective for our society, in that is how are we going to better that we are going to make sure that prisoners stay out of prison and that we are not going to abuse young boys into prison anymore. How are we going to get the crime rate in our countries down? And how are we going to prove to the army and to the defense force, to the navy teams, that we are not abusing their employment as being the protective services teams of our countries? And that exactly is where we want our parliamentary leaders' discussions to be at, so that the aggression in our communities are not going to increase, and so that we get to that there is the business restructuring in the office in our communities. And when we look at the office in our communities, we look at that mafia life is always going to be part of our communities in our countries and of certain people's choices. But mafia life was never mafia life until someone that sometimes find himself in a parliamentary seat required someone to go and react to protect someone else. A mafia and a person on drugs was never a person on drugs until someone allowed drugs to enter the country, and someone exactly as Google in and where drugs are delivered at, and someone exactly allowed drugs to be in our community, shared amongst different houses in our community. Crime in our community has never been crime until someone else felt that they had to go to the army to go and be endangered, and someone else find themselves in a jolly lifestyle and in a jolly office environment and disrupting our community with abuses. Therefore, when we hold office in these discussions, we include everyone into the office discussion of our society. And we are not going to deprive one another of where we are at in our seasons. And we are going to allow ourselves to be educated on what does it mean to restructure our generation to that is non-abusive, and that is non-abusive, and that is non-manipulative and non-aggressive to our society and to every one of us in general. And therefore, the one house education of this month's discussion, we're going to leave at that. And we're going to continue with office and with restructuring office on our business HR 23 business restructuring in Rabia Elise's discussion. And that's where we want our parliamentary house to, that's the matters and discussions that we want our parliamentary house to listen to today, is that everything that we have discussed, our parliamentary leaders, our community and society in general, the prisoners in our society, the crime rate and how it's created and how it can be prevented, in business, that is the office of our generation in general. And there is not a question of who holds office, but it is a question of what's required to happen in our countries to not abuse our community and our society and everyone that finds themselves being part of this amazing universe and being mankind on earth. That is where we are at with this discussion today and this month with our leading this generation discussion with me, Rabia Elise. Have an amazing month further.